AMG GTs have an above average depreciation rate. A study conducted by Haggerty in 2021 showed that they depreciated much more than other supercars. After 3 years, they lost more than 25% of their value. However, if you're buying used, you don't need to lose so much money. We need to take two things into account. First, the depreciation pattern of the AMG GT is characterized by a high mileage sensitivity. This sounds like a bad thing, right? But it isn't, as long as you're buying used. Second, the current market is completely different than the market in 2021. Car prices soared and are now coming down. And this is an important input to the current depreciation curve. But before we dive into all of that, let's first have a look at the current market and the price levels for the different model types. Now, as you probably already saw in the thumbnail, we'll only cover the two-door variants. Let me know in the comment section if you would like to see an analysis for the four-door variant. Over here we have the US market in March. The base, S, C, R and Black series are included, but the latter ones are crazy expensive and are messing up the graph scaling, so let's remove them. We'll cover them later. In total there are 267 cars for sale, and this is a 20% drop from January. Supply is decreasing rapidly, and this is in line with the broader market. Looking at the prices, we can see that the sweet spot lays around $100,000. For that price you can get a low mileage S or base model or a high mileage GTS, but you can already enter the market for $70,000. The GTRs are significantly more expensive. They cost approximately $40,000 more than a GTS. The Pro version, which are the cars at the top over here, are of course the most expensive. Prices go up to $250,000. Now what's interesting about these prices is that they are at approximately the same level as the ones for the 911 Carreras. For the base and the S models, that's something that I expected. The MSRP was slightly higher, but so were the depreciation rates. One could argue that they should be compared to the turbos, at least when you look at the MSRP. Asking prices though are closer to the ones for the most expensive Carreras. Now much of this is the result of the steep depreciation curve of the AMG GTs, but actually I should say the historically steep depreciation curves. Current depreciation rates for reasonably used cars are on par with the ones in the 911 market. Let's have a look at the price trends for the AMG GTs and after that make a comparison to the 911 Carreras. Over here we have the price trends for the GTR Pro, the normal GTR, the C, the S and the base model. You can see that the price trend for the GTR Pro looks a bit strange. The confidence intervals are all over the place and the price volatility is high. This trend is then also unreliable due to the small market size, so let's remove it. Starting at the top with the AMG GTR, we can see that prices increased by 31% or $43,000 between March 2020 and June 2022. And this is in line with the rest of the market, and so is the topping pattern that followed. Prices have been decreasing by 2 to 3% per quarter and are now down by 8.4% or $15,500. Naturally, the cars from 2020 lost slightly more and the older cars slightly less. And all in all, this is a good result. Many cars that have a reputation for low depreciation rates lost much more since their market top of last summer. Looking at the other models, you can see that I don't have any data from before June 2022, so we can only evaluate the drop from the market top. After all, almost all cars stopped around this time, so it's fair to assume that the AMG GTs did as well. If I remove the R, we can see that prices decreased by 12.4% for all models, and this equals approximately $17,500 for the C, $12,000 for the S, and $13,600 for the base models. In the grand scheme of things, these rates are very reasonable. Look what happens when I add the 911 Carreras to the graph. Over here we have now in orange the 991.2 GTS, in green the S, and in blue the base model. Compared to the market top, base prices are down by 12.2%, S prices by 12.5%, and GTS prices by 15.4%. So what's all the fuss about? Depreciation rates are almost identical to the ones in the 911 Carrera market. a car that isn't known for its excessive value loss. This, however, only applies when we look at the aggregate statistics. The devil is in the details. Prices for reasonably used GTs are developing the same way as reasonably used Carreras, but this doesn't apply to relatively new cars. In the first part of its lifetime, an AMG GT has a much higher sensitivity to mileage than a 911. So this means that a low mileage GT loses value much quicker than a low mileage 911. After all, we just saw that GT prices are below equivalent Carrera prices, even though that the MSRP was slightly higher. It is the initial drop that matters here. So if you're looking to purchase an AMG GT and care about values, it would be wise to avoid low mileage examples. Let me show you. Over here we have the mileage to price relationship for the AMG GTC and the 991.2 Carrera S. We can see that low mileage GTCs are considerably more expensive than the Carrera S's. Yet, when the mileage increases, this difference disappears. And this is the result from a difference in the mileage sensitivity. GTCs lose on average 0.7% per 1,000 miles driven and Carrera S's 0.5%. Now if you're an AMG GT connoisseur, you might call this comparison completely nonsense. And I'd say you're partially right. AMG GTCs go up to model year 2020, but Carrera S's only to 2019. So of course, a newer car has a higher mileage sensitivity. But look what happens when we compare cars from the same model year. Over here we have now the mileage, the model year and the price. And I hope that this comes across on video. If we look at the cars for model year 2019 and 2018, we can see that the depreciation curve is much steeper for the AMG GTs than for the Carreras. And this especially applies to the first 10,000 miles. GTCs start to fall immediately, while 911s only start to fall significantly after 10,000 miles. A consequence of this is that the 2019 and 2018 GTC fall below an equivalent Carrera S at approximately 25 to 30,000 miles. Shortly after that, the depreciation rate falls in both markets and the difference between the two becomes much smaller. Now these curves of course aren't perfect. There are not so many cars for sale with 1,000 or 50,000 miles, so the estimates at the end of the lines aren't completely trustworthy, but they are at the period in between. Let's have a look at another example. Over here we have the 991.1 base Carrera and the AMG GTS. And in this case, the GTS has the advantage because most cars are from 2016, while the Carreras are slightly newer. But you can see that it doesn't matter. Low mileage GTSs are priced approximately $3,000 lower than an equivalent Carrera base. But this difference increases to approximately $10,000 when the mileage increases. In other words, the GT has a higher mileage sensitivity than the 911. Now I need to admit that the differences aren't always that extreme as what I just showed you. Look for example at this comparison between the AMG GTC, the 991.2 turbo base and the AMG GTR base. The curve is slightly steeper for the AMG GTR than for the turbo, but the one for the GTC and turbo are fairly identical. However, if you make a large enough number of comparisons, you'll find that AMG GTs rarely have a lower mileage sensitivity than 911s, so the effect that we just discussed clearly exists. If we translate this back to more practical terms, it means that it makes a lot of sense to buy an AMG GT with a slightly higher mileage. Now before we wrap up, we still need to discuss the Black Series. We removed this car at the beginning of the video because it was messing with the graph scaling. But that's not the only thing it's messing with. It's also messing with the people who thought that prices would soar indefinitely. They didn't. Prices decreased by 18% compared to the market top of June 2022. So these cars are not immune to the market correction. They even decreased slightly more than the market average. Of course, this doesn't mean that they're cheap. Prices are still far above MSRP. And with that, it's time to wrap up and conclude. Yes, AMG GTs are depreciating. It's 2023 and there are only very few cars that held on to their peak value of last summer. If you're buying a GT, there's not so much to worry about when it comes to the market-specific characteristics. As we saw in the price trends, depreciation rates for modestly used ones are identical to the 911s. Yet, it pays off to have a good look at the mileage of the car that you're buying. More often than not, low mileage examples have a higher mileage sensitivity than a 911, a car that is in many ways the industry's benchmark. If you buy a low mileage GT and drive it for, let's say, 40,000 miles, the additional loss compared to a 911 could be between $10,000 and $15,000. It's only at approximately 25,000 miles that the rates converge. So especially if you're planning to drive your car a lot, it pays off to take this into account and go for a higher mileage example. Naturally, it's not a mind-blowing finding that low mileage cars depreciate more than high mileage cars, but I think that the difference to the 911 is quite striking. Whether or not you should care about that $10,000 to $15,000 difference is of course up to you. Some people probably couldn't give a damn, while it could be a relevant factor for other buyers. And with that we arrived at the end of this video. Now if you enjoyed this data-driven way of analyzing car markets, or it helped you in your buying or selling process, please give a thumbs up for this video. If you would like to see an analysis for a different car, head over to my channel. Over there you will find market updates for a large variety of cars. Can't find the car you're looking for? Let me know the name of the car down below in the comment section. Once there are enough requests for a certain car, I'll make a video about it. As always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next week for a new video.